Hello and welcome to the podcast, all about becoming a health coach. I'm Megan McCrory, an integrative nutrition health coach in training. Each week I recap what I'm learning at the Institute for Integrative Nutrition and how I'm applying it to my life. If this is your first time tuning in, I'm happy that you found the podcast, and a very special welcome to you. You may want to go back and listen from the beginning to hear more about my health coaching journey. For now, let's dive right into episode 16. This week in Module 14, we explore sleep quality and quantity and the hot button topic of caffeine and more on how to effectively coach. So how many of you love to sleep? I love sleeping. It comes easy to me, which is especially despised by my husband. I'll say, I'm going to bed now, and I'll be asleep in a matter of 5 minutes while he lays awake, listening to my heavy breathing and, otherwise grumbling under his breath at the ease of my falling asleep. I know it's hard for a lot of people, including my husband, who wakes up almost every night. Joshua Rosenthal, the founder of the Institute for Integrative Nutrition, starts off this module by talking about the quality of sleep we get nowadays. The first sign that our quality of sleep is changing is the amount of supplements that are on the market now to help you fall asleep and stay asleep. But why is it harder for us to sleep? Many people believe it's the amount of information and the technology that we have today. Our brains need to react faster to keep up with the stimulus. Without allowing proper time before sleeping for the brain to power down, it can take us longer to fall asleep. Besides technology and information, our lives are at a much faster pace now. Most people don't take the weekends or days off to rest or rejuvenate. They basically pack the days full with all the stuff they can't get done on the weekdays. So with regards to our health, there is a correlation between sleep and weight loss or gain. If you're fully rested, you are more likely to make healthy choices, and the opposite is also true. If you're tired, your willpower suffers, and you will reach decision fatigue much faster. So it's very, very important to get enough sleep. Our first guest speaker for Module 14 was Ruben Nyman, a clinical psychologist and the director of the Circadian Health Associates. He starts out his lecture on how we need to renegotiate our relationship with sleep. We need to fall back in love with sleep, he says. Sleep is one of the 4 pillars of health, alongside nutrition, relaxation, and moving. So no matter what the culture, geographic location, etc., all people eat and sleep. Nutrition and sleep are separate disciplines in healthcare, but they're really, really linked together more than people realize. Like nutrition, sleep is relatively a new field of study. There is not much clinical data yet, but some is coming from both animal studies and some larger human studies. But what is clear is that our eating habits impact our sleep and dreams, and conversely, our sleeping habits impact our eating, our metabolism, and our weight. Dr. Nyman's purpose of this lecture was to increase our sensitivity to sleep as health coaches and the work we do with nutrition. We all have heard that we as people are consumers. In addition to consuming food and drink, we also consume oxygen, we consume information, and we also consume light. Dr. Nyman goes on to talk about how much of the information we are consuming now is, quote, junk information, like junk food. The quality of available information has expanded greatly, again, like food, but in many cases, the quality of the information has gone down. The same is true with light. We overconsume poor quality light throughout the day by moving indoors. The artificial light is far inferior to the natural light of the sun. We are also exposed to much more light at night, and all of this consumption will at some point become energy. So we are over-consuming massive quantities of energy. Dr. Nyman then shifts to how exactly excess energy affects us. He states that it's literally heating us up. Similar to how the planet is warming with energy, so does our body, in turn providing a low level of chronic inflammation. We also have an unconscious identification with machines, and many view sleep as fuel, not rest. People often confuse rest with recreation or having a drink or two. To the body, that's not rest. I think here, this is the point that Europeans do understand better than Americans, and I can't speak for other cultures because I haven't lived anywhere else, but the culture here of rest is big. Rest here is a big thing, and they do know what that means as well. Although I do see it more and more looking like the US with the pace of life here getting faster. People here actually go on wellness weekends to hotels to relax, to go to the spa or the sauna, and just to take a weekend to relax and rest. I think this is an awesome thing to do, and I think more Americans need to know how to do this. I think that's a big culture shift, though. And I'd be curious to know different cultures around the world, especially in Asia, how they do this, if they relax or are calmed in a certain way. Certainly from a business point of view, I don't see my colleagues in Singapore, for example, ever sleeping or not working. So I'm curious if that's the same over there or in other parts of the world as well. But I can definitely see that Europe is becoming more driven the way the Americans are, even though they still do value their rest. So we often look towards food for fuel, and in what Dr. Nyman calls counterfeit energies. So these are high glycemic foods which give you a slight rush of energy. So we become more dependent on those. And many people, especially women, confuse being tired and sleepy for being hungry, and will actually eat twice as frequently as a man, which is, I thought, quite an interesting, factoid. Insomnia, which is just sleeplessness, is a sleep disorder where people have trouble sleeping. And that doesn't just mean being awake all night. I always thought insomnia was like somebody who's just lying awake all night and they just can never sleep. It actually just means, it has a wide variety of meanings, but it can mean somebody having difficulty falling asleep, or they have trouble staying asleep, or anything in between there. So it's a little bit more broad than just staying awake all night, which is kind of what I thought. Insomnia is really strongly associated with chronic hyperarousal. Now, hyperarousal shows up as an increased body and brain metabolic rates, elevated heart rates, elevated core body temperature, elevated nighttime cortisol or the stress hormone, and a decreased serum melatonin, among other things. And hyperarousal is basically where your wakefulness has gone like haywire. It's like off the charts. And when I Googled hyperarousal, a lot of this, what you'll find there is linked to PTSD. So I'm not really sure how it relates to somebody who's having insomnia, but I think the idea is that someone who has had PTSD, when they start to think about the moment in time when they had the traumatic thing that happened to them, all of these things start happening. Their body rate, their elevated heart rates, their body temperature goes up, their stress. So it's actually a very similar response to the same thing for someone who is over aroused before going to bed. So I think this is probably not typical, but I think it's something you should think about. There's a whole host of issues that affect people that get 6 hours or less sleep per night. Those are things like increased risk of infection, insulin resistance, obesity, diabetes, cancer, and mood disorders. And I just handpicked a few things. There was a much longer list. And really, what I see as the problem is that the prevalence of having disrupted sleep is growing. So whether it's because you live in a place where it's too noisy or too loud or too hot or too cold, It doesn't matter. The whole point is that the idea is that more and more people are having poorer and poorer sleep. Dr. Nyman wrote an article in the Huffington Post in 2011 called "We Don't Get Sleep Because We Don't Get Sleep." I hope you can hear the intonation in my voice there. So we don't get sleep because we don't understand sleep, right? I'll leave a link in the show notes to the article, but to summarize briefly, sleep in our culture is now quite devalued. Someone is considered lazy if they sleep too much, or perhaps people might brag about not needing so much sleep, like it's a badge of honor. So depriving ourselves of sleep, especially dream sleep, can result in fatigue and depression. But also it can result in poor decision making and obesity, as I mentioned at the beginning of the podcast. When you experience sleep loss, you are tired the next day. I think everyone can agree that that happens. And when you're tired, you decrease your overall activity levels. You might not want to go to the gym. You just want to lay around and do nothing because you're tired, right? So you're not moving your body. Sleep loss also lowers leptin and increases ghrelin, two hormones which trigger hunger and lead to poor food choices. So once you get into this cycle, it can be really a never-ending cycle because the nutrition that you put into your body also affects your sleep. So you might be more tempted to drink coffee or an energy drink because you slept poorly, and that in turn will also make you sleeping more difficult that next night. So eating certain foods or eating too late can also affect how you sleep. When you eat too close to bedtime, your body core temperature and metabolic rates rise, also making it more difficult to fall asleep. Alcohol also disrupts sleep. So many people see drinking something as helping them fall asleep because alcohol may make you feel drowsy or tired. But then what it does is it really disrupts those deep sleep cycles that you need for the restorative rest that your body needs. So you can see this kind of cycle: poor sleep, poor food choices, bad food choices, disrupted sleep, and so on and so forth in a vicious cycle. So at some point, something needs to change, right? So a lot of people will turn to pharmaceuticals or other substances to help them fall asleep. And most of those things are usually kind of only masking the issue. Because remember, there's got to be an underlying issue why you're not getting enough sleep to begin with. And if you're taking those things that are not natural, they tend to be habit forming, and that's also not great. There are natural supplements out there, as I mentioned before, that you can take to help your sleep cycles, like magnesium, potassium, melatonin, kava, and a bunch more things, which you can try. Again, the idea, though, is you really should figure out what's causing the poor sleep. So how well do you sleep? I know I sleep very well. It used to be hard to know like how well you slept, but now there's a bunch of wearable devices which you can use to track your sleep. So I use my Apple Watch and a program called Pillow. I paid for the program because it not only does it track my light sleep, my deep sleep, my REM, and my awake times overnight, it also overlays my heart rate on the graph. So I can see how long it takes for my heart rate to kind of slow down and sink down. I can also turn on a feature that will record any noises during the night. So essentially, my phone is next to me, and if I make a noise, like for example, when I'm stressed out, I tend to grind my teeth at night, and it's a loud enough noise that it will trigger the recording feature on this app. The other reason I use that feature is when I'm sick, to monitor how many times I cough throughout the night. Because I know that when I'm sick and I'm coughing at night, I'm not getting a restful sleep. So I can kind of see how well I'm healing by watching the number of times that I wake up at night coughing as it decreases. So it's really a good thing nowadays that you can manage your sleep and see how well you're sleeping. And if you don't like to wear things to sleep, you can also buy a pad that lays underneath your mattress that will record a lot of the same things. I can't speak so well how that works, but I know it is an option to help you monitor your sleep. So here are a few tips to help you get a better night's sleep. So 1, try having a lighter evening meal a little earlier so that your digestion doesn't interfere with sleep. So this is a big one because on 2 fronts. 1, if you eat a big meal very close to bedtime, I know for me, my body temperature rises. I get hot, like physically hot to the touch. I also now am digesting a large amount of food well into the night when my body's circadian rhythms, including the optimal time for my gut to process the food, is well past, like they want to be asleep. And so this is disrupting my sleep. The other way that you should know that eating too close to your bedtime, especially a large meal, is disruptive is that as long as your body is digesting, as long as your gut is digesting that food, it's not taking the time it needs to repair the digestive tract. So I read that every night your body can repair almost 10% of the intestinal wall lining because you have food that goes past it and sloughs off lining, and it needs to repair that lining every night. And when you're digesting food overnight, your body's not repairing itself. So on 2 points, it's not a great idea to eat a large meal close to sleeping time. Your largest meal should probably be in the middle of the day, or first thing in the morning, to allow your body time to process that food. The second thing to help you get a better night's sleep is to avoid having a lot to drink right before bed. This one's very logical because if you drink a lot right before bed, you might have to wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom. And at first thought you might say, but that's fine, I fall right back to sleep. But the point is that you've still interrupted your sleep cycle, even if you fall back to sleep quite easily. So if you are a person that will wake up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, think about maybe not drinking. Experiment with yourself and stop drinking earlier in the evening to see if that will help you. Now, on the other hand, when you wake up in the morning, you should have a huge glass of water because you will be dehydrated over the night. Okay, the third tip for a better night's sleep is to don't bring your cell phone to bed with you, or your tablet, or your computer, all of those things. So now I've gotten into the habit now where I can keep my cell phone into the other room, not next to my bed. And actually, I keep my Apple Watch on. So I do get my alarm in the morning from my Apple Watch, although I don't really need an alarm because I tend to wake up at the same time every day. But, there's always that panic that you won't wake up. So I wear my Apple Watch to bed and my phone is in the other room, because if I don't do that, I'm just going to lean over and check my last few messages, and then I get into Facebook or into YouTube, and then an hour has passed and I haven't gone to bed, and now I've just been watching the stupid things. So leave that stuff out of the bedroom, and I think you'll all be better for it. I wish more people would leave their phones, away. The fourth thing to help you get a better night's sleep is to use eye masks or earplugs to reduce light and noise. Especially in the summertime, I'm finding it very difficult to fall asleep late at night because it's so light later in the evening. And also, we want to keep the windows open, but those birds in the morning, they're like, at 5:30, they're bright and chirping, and maybe we don't want to wake up every day at 5:30 with birds. So I know that's a first world problem, but eye masks and ear plugs can help with that to keep you into that sleeping state longer. The last thing that would be really good for you to try is to create a bedtime routine and this kind of triggers that sleep is coming. I mean, how many of us know little kids or have kids where you have a bedtime routine for them to help them fall asleep? You don't just say, okay, now you're in bed. When you have a kid, maybe you take a bath, you put on the pajamas, you brush the teeth, maybe you say a bedtime story, all of these things leading up to bed, and they know it's getting closer and closer to bed. Everyone should have a nice bedtime routine. It doesn't have to be too long, but think about it. Taking a 2 or 3 minute warm shower, brushing your teeth, that kind of thing. And this all lets your body in a habitual way know that it's getting ready for bed. So think about that. And let me know if you have tried to change your diet or anything else to help facilitate better sleep and how it worked for you. You can email me at becomingahealthcoach@gmail.com and let me know how it worked for you. I'd be really curious. Our next guest lecturer was Arianna Huffington. She is really, truly an amazing speaker. After giving us a little bit of background on her life, her main focus of the lecture was about her physical breakdown and how that was a turning point in her life. She had pushed herself to the physical limits and her body gave out. She collapsed and had to get 4 stitches over her eye. The lecture was titled Thrive as an Entrepreneur, and she went on to tell us how we cannot expect to help others when we're not taking care of ourselves first. She introduced the term keystone habit. The keystone habit is the one habit that allows you to change your other habits. And for Arianna Huffington, that was sleep. She changed her sleeping habits from 4 to 5 hours per night to 7 to 9 hours per night and immediately saw a huge difference. She became much more effective. She became a better leader. And of course, then she also became healthier. She went on to tell us about how her office now offers yoga and massage, nap rooms, healthy snacks, and so on. And she points out that, many of our leaders in the world are often making critical decisions, are far underslept, and underslept in a way that you can perceive someone who has underslept as being drunk even. And I think there's some studies about that. When you're driving, they're saying lack of sleep or being tired is just as bad, if not worse, than being drunk while behind a wheel. And if you think about decisions that are being made on a political level and business level by people who are very powerful, but also not sleeping enough, it's just effectively they're making decisions while drunk. It's amazing. So then she switched over to talking about metrics of success. And how this kind of metrics of success is driving the no sleep culture. So money and power are those 2 metrics, right? That's success, money and power. And she says that this is kind of like a 2-legged stool. You cannot stand on money and power alone. So she wanted to add a 3rd leg or a 3rd metric. And that 3rd metric consists of 4 pillars. Now, she went on in depth about each of these 4 pillars. I won't do that here, but her 4 pillars are well-being, wisdom, wonder, and giving. And by adding in those things to the definition of success, you will be better off than just striving for money or power alone. Because at the end of the day, there is more to life than money and power. And one of the key things that stuck with me in this lecture is that she said it's easy to get intellectual agreement, but it's hard to change habits. And this is one of my core principles when working with clients. This is exactly why people who know what to do don't do it, because it's a habit change, not an intellectual understanding of what's going on. So habit change is at the core concept when talking about helping someone change their lifestyle. As health coaches, we also need to be able to adapt our habits or lifestyle to accommodate our new entrepreneurial venture, which is kind of the whole thing of what Arianna Huffington was talking about, was being an entrepreneur, self-care, making sure that you're doing it right for you first, and then everything else will follow after that. So by focusing on well-being, wisdom, wonder, and giving as equal players to the money and power, we will set ourselves up for a much better and more sustainable success in our new entrepreneurial ventures. If you haven't heard Arianna Huffington speak, I have linked a video in the show notes to an interview where she highlights some of these same points. Next up, we explored the hot button topic of caffeine. Joshua lectured on this topic and started off by stating that the average American drinks 3.5 cups of coffee a day. Of course, coffee is not just the only place you can get caffeine, so we will not demonize poor coffee beans. We have a lot of other sources of caffeine, including sodas and energy drinks. The fact is that most people use caffeine for energy, or what they perceive as energy. Caffeine is not energy. It is a molecule that stimulates the adrenal glands in a way that is completely not normal. The adrenal glands produce adrenaline, among other hormones, and if you push those adrenal glands over time, you may end up with adrenal fatigue or exhaustion. Now, while this may sound like a very severe response to overuse of caffeine, there are other less severe side effects like sleeplessness, as I mentioned earlier. Caffeine is also typically taken with sugar, right? In the form of chocolate, soda, sweetened coffee or tea, or an energy drink. So now your body is responding to two forms of stimulants at once. Caffeine producing that fight or flight response in your adrenal glands, plus the sugar raising your blood sugar and triggering an insulin response. So of course, 2 to 4 hours later, you come down from that high and repeat. It's easy to see how that kind of a cycle can start to wreak havoc on your body's systems. You can be saying to me right now, like, well, I don't feel jittery or anxious after having coffee. It doesn't mean that it's not putting undue stress on your systems. So keep that in mind when you're drinking coffee or caffeine of any kind. And of course, each person is different, and you should experiment on yourself to figure out how caffeine affects you. But right now I'd like to tell you my personal story with caffeine. So I drank caffeine at least since starting university. Maybe before that, but I don't remember. But I know that at university I started working at a coffee house. And after university, I worked in more coffee houses and I drank coffee. So I drank coffee basically from the time that I was at least 18 to the time that I was 39. So 20 years. And a couple years ago, I really wanted to go without coffee just to see if I could do it. And the driving factor for that at the time was long hiking trips where we'd have to carry everything with us. And I didn't want to have to bring coffee with me just to avoid a headache on the trail. So I did an experiment to see how long would it take for me to detox from caffeine so I wouldn't have to take coffee with me. I stopped drinking coffee for about 1 week. So, and I was fine. After 2 days, I had, the first and second day, I had like a minor headache, but it was, irritating, not debilitating. When the week was over, I started drinking caffeine again, basically because I had completed my experiment. I knew that I could detox within 2 days, and I had no other reason to not drink coffee at that point. So I went back to drinking coffee. Fast forward some years, last year I went to see my OBGYN, and she told me that I had 3 fibroids in my uterus. And if they continued to grow at that pace, I would need a hysterectomy. And I'm sure you're asking yourself, well, what does coffee have to do with your uterus? I'm getting there. Trust me, this is interesting. So I was telling a friend about this over lunch, and she said, oh, I've heard that caffeine can, feed or essentially interfere and cause fibroids to grow. And I said, oh, well, that's an interesting thing. I have, 2 more months before I go back to my physician for another checkup. I'll stop drinking coffee and all caffeine, no green tea, no nothing, just no caffeine, period. And let's see how it looks in 2 months. So I started this on a Friday, and like I said, on the weekend, I was super tired. I had a little bit of a headache, but I just slept. I just knew that I needed to sleep, which is another sign that's probably not so good to have as much caffeine as I have in my system. And the next week, I was fine. Now, it took me, I would say, 6 weeks before I stopped thinking about coffee. Where at work, I would think, oh, I would really like to have a coffee. Home, I'd have a coffee, but I had decaf coffee. So it wasn't like I was missing the taste of coffee, because I had 1 decaf in the morning and I had 1 decaf in the afternoon. And yes, of course, this has a little bit of caffeine, but not near the quantity of caffeine I was taking in before. So, but I did know a very big difference, like I said, about after 6 weeks, where I stopped thinking about coffee. And I knew that this was kind of an addiction thing when I'd heard people who had stopped smoking, that it took years and years and years before they stopped thinking about wanting a cigarette. So I'm glad it only took me 6 weeks. But I think at that point I was truly done. Like, my body was finally out of the caffeine, and my receptors had gone back to normal and everything was fine. Then I had my OBGYN appointment and my fibroids had stopped growing. So she said, okay, at this point you don't need to go any further with the hysterectomy if your fibroids don't grow anymore. So we made another appointment for 6 months. That's in a couple months. Let's see how it goes. But at this point in time, I was thinking, you know what? Caffeine, why do I need it? I don't really need it. I enjoy a good cup of peppermint tea as well. And if I really wanted to have a coffee, I'd have decaf. And if there was no decaf, then, I could still have a cup, but it wasn't like something that I was going back to having one every single day. And I feel, honestly, I don't feel that much different, but I do know that I'm not, I don't need to have it. And I think that for me is the biggest difference, is that whether or not coffee affects you, jittery, heart pumping, whatever, or if you just barely feel the effects, I think for me, it all boiled down to the fact that I still was addicted to it. If I didn't have it, my body would have a physical response, and I didn't like that. So I stopped drinking caffeine, and I'm fine with it. And one of the things as I learned in this course was the reason why the caffeine was affecting it was the caffeine has priority in the liver over my estrogen in terms of being filtered out of my bloodstream. So all the time that I'm drinking coffee and caffeine, my estrogen is playing second fiddle to my to getting that caffeine processed out. And when you have that kind of a backlog of estrogen that's not getting filtered out by your liver, this is going back into your bloodstream. And this is typically the type of estrogen that's found in a lot of female cancers and also in fibroids. And that makes a lot more sense now when I understand how the pathway works behind this as well. So, yeah. So for once, I had really gotten through my coffee addiction. And now every once in a while, it happened twice in the last 7 months where I've had a caffeinated coffee. So I guess the bigger picture here is always to figure out what works best for you. And in order to do that, you really need to eliminate it for your diet for a long period of time, whatever that period is for you, 4, 6, 8 weeks, sometimes longer if it's like a food or something. And then put it back in. See what happens. That's all you can do. Experiment with yourself. Be an experiment of one. The last part of this module was focused on coaching and active listening. Active listening is being fully present and focused without thinking ahead about what you're going to say next. I have been practicing this in my daily life, and I believe I'm getting better at it with practice. But with that said, I do need to remind myself to do this, as it does not come naturally to me. I'm definitely an extrovert, and I think I say what's on my mind, and oftentimes I say something before thinking. So I'm working on a kind of mantra or affirmation, I guess you could call it, that I would repeat before each session with a client. And I want it to help me get into the right headspace and also to focus my thoughts on that person. So I will start with a simple meditation, and then I would say my mantras out loud. And I think this will help me remind me to keep into that active listening stance where, repeating back what I've heard, waiting, just being present in the moment. And when you do this active listening, as well as when you're coaching, it's much easier to not jump in after the person has said something and want to follow up like, oh yeah, and this. And letting, as Joshua say, letting there be some silence, letting the client maybe come back with a little bit more. Because once you start feeling that sound, like the emptiness with your voice, your client's not talking anymore. And what you want is for them to talk and for you to listen. So I think this is, again, that's really a good tool. I would encourage all future coaches to start working on this skill right now. It is not hard to work on the skill. It's actually quite easy, but it is definitely hard to master this. So start working on it now. If you'd like to go a bit deeper on any of the topics I covered today, there are several links in the show notes to some materials that you might find interesting. If you have a question or you'd just like to drop me a line and say hi, I would be over the moon if you did that. Send an email to becomingahealthcoach@gmail.com or visit my website where all the podcast show notes are posted at mybestself.fit. And if you like the show, I would really appreciate it if you could rate it on Apple Podcasts. And if you really, really like the show, you could write me a short review. That would be awesome. When you do that, it helps other people find the show. And that's it for today. I'm Megan McCrory, and you've been listening to How I'm Becoming a Health Coach. And until next time, stay happy and healthy.
Hey, you're still listening. Great. Okay, now I can tell you about my 12-week goal setting session. So in this 1-hour session, I'm going to help guide you through a powerful process inspired by the best-selling book, The 12-Week Year. I know. Everybody at this time of the year starts to think about year-long goals. And I would argue that year-long goals are really hard to contextualize. What is going to be happening in a year from now? You have no idea. But 12 weeks gives you a little bit better understanding because you kind of already have your calendar booked out for the next 12 weeks, kind of know what's going to be going on. So if you can focus your goals on the next 12 weeks, you can make some really big actionable steps towards your long-term vision. So in this 1-hour session, we do talk about long-term vision. We talk about where you want to be. We talk about what your 5-year, 10-year, 3-year, all those goals are. But that's only a brief part. We know we see the long distance view, but let's break that down. And then we get into the 1 to 3 strategic 12-week goals that are going to get you to those long-term vision. Then we're going to put that into a really cool action plan with like checklists and timing and all that jazz to make sure that you are clear and that you have accountability to get those goals done. And then that's not it. Then we are going to tackle your roadblocks because you know you have roadblocks. So we're going to tackle those roadblocks. We're going to create a plan to overcome them. So you know when you start to self-sabotage, you know what you can do to get around those roadblocks. Okay, so if this is interesting for you, it is only 1 hour of your time and it's only 45 Swiss francs. I host this gig over on Fiverr, but I'm also going to put a link down in the show notes. So if you're interested, hit me up.